everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest today is someone that came out of Straightway. She is actually Troy's mother, who he was the first interview I did, and she is here to tell her side of things and what it was like being a parent there and how her and her husband got out. And I'm just gonna go ahead and welcome Miss Alaina.
Hi.
Hello. How's it going?
Good. It's going good.
Oh, I'm so excited. I have not seen you in years.
I know. We live north, so we haven't seen anybody but Troy and Rachel from Texas. So
yeah, probably since Center Times.
Times.
So yeah, you guys. So Troy did somewhat tell y'all's story. And real quick, I'll just kind of go over just a little bit of why you guys came. You guys came to go through the rehab part of it due to your husband was having some anger issues, and y'all decided, I guess, that this was a place that could help y'all at the time, and decided to go through the rehab part. And yeah, so you moved on campus, and I guess how many years, or were you going through the program part?
So the program itself for us was 18 months and then reentry phase.
Okay. Yeah. So I feel like it's been a little bit different for different people. Some people have been like over 2 years, some it's like a year. I guess it just kind of depends whether they think what you needed and probably how much money you were giving each month to go through the program.
I think that played a role. There, I was just trying to pull something up. Go ahead.
No, yeah, but did you want to say something about I know, like, what I have said is just that part of the reason I'm doing this is just to kind of help other people who have been through some of the same things. This is in no way to like talk a lot of crap about someone or to discredit someone. This literally is to help people who have been through traumatic events. And maybe some of them aren't so traumatic, but it still are things that were in abusive situations. And so, yeah, I don't know if you wanted to say something along those lines.
Well, first and foremost, I wanted to do this because I know that as I've listened to your other interviews, it's helped me process some things that I didn't understand, that I didn't realize was going on at the time, or now it makes more sense. And I think that the more people that get out and talk about it, it gives courage to those who might be struggling with what they've gone through, and maybe it'll bring some healing. And I also just want to make it known that if I'm talking about an elder or whoever and it's your parent, it's not my intention to hurt you for the things that your parents did to us or with us or whatever, but I don't want anybody hurt through the process. I'm hoping that it can bring healing and hope for people and courage. And maybe if it gets in the right hands, maybe courage enough for people to leave and stop. My main goal is to stop the hypocrisy and stop the abuse.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that would be the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so let's just get started. So you guys are going through the program part and everything. I guess what was the first, like when you first went there, is it something that was kind of like, man, this is helping, or you just automatically started seeing red flags?
Well, I think that when we went, it was still teen challenge, and the curriculum was teen challenge, and it was very biblical, and there were a lot of biblical principles that we applied, and I felt like it was very helpful. Brian was abusive to me. It wasn't life or death abusive type, but he was abusive, and he never laid a hand on me from the time he went through the program, you know, and ever since. And so I'm very, very grateful for that. There were things we learned to apply in our marriage, and unfortunately, the discipline with our children, I think that I don't think anybody there had an inkling of what to do. And so I think that the process of disciplining kids, I don't think that Brian ever got instruction that was truly biblical and helpful, and they didn't really deal with anger. And I think it's because they were angry themselves, you know, and so I don't think that they ever dealt with the anger part of it. And so the discipline of the children, that actually worsened.
Yeah, so he's trying to go through the program to get help for
Right.
anger, but it's actually doing the opposite, I guess, right?
Right. Well, I think it began with the episode when from Troy's interview, where he was with another elder, and the elder told him how to discipline Troy, and it was so extreme, and it left him black and blue. And so I think that was my first red flag. And it wasn't, we weren't there very long, I don't think. Maybe that wasn't my first one, but we can go into my first one if you want to.
Well, real quick, you know, let me just, Troy told some of his story. He was sexually assaulted at a very young age. And so when this had happened, you, instead of doing what should have been done,
Right.
they brought your husband into, did y'all go into counseling at all at first? And
so when Troy confessed what had happened, he was in the bathtub and started crying, and what's the matter? And he confessed what had happened. And I was so shocked. And then he confessed everything else he could think of, trying to get clean. He just said, I feel so dirty. And so I, you know, hugged him and told him I forgave him and that we'll get to the bottom of it. And I expected at that point, okay, we're at a place where we're going to get help. We're at a place that's for families. And so I had an expectation that they were going to have wisdom and counsel and encouragement to help Troy process this. He was 6, maybe 7 when this happened. And so I went and told the parent of the child that did this. And then a day or two later, I was told to bring Troy to one of the classrooms. And then I was told to leave because I wasn't going to be present during this. And they told Brian to use a belt, and that they were going to spank Troy because of the seriousness of it. And like Troy said in his video, he lost count at 50 strikes. I remember when he came back, it was so horrific. I mean, I didn't see his bottom till the next day. And he was black and blue from his lower back down his thighs. And it was solid. I mean, like, there was no place that wasn't black and blue. And just, excuse me. We were separated because couples were separated, and we got to see each other for dinner, and there was a monitor there. And so I felt like I needed to say something to Brian about his bottom, and I couldn't say a whole lot with a monitor there that listens to everything that you say. And I know that I mentioned that he was black and blue, and Brian's response was his discipline had to be severe considering the seriousness of the, the offense. And I'm like, he's the child that was offended.
Mhm.
He's the child that came clean, and yet looking back from things that have been disclosed even since his interview, I think that the reason he was so drastically disciplined was that if you traced back where this originated, it originated with elders, young or teenage boys that this was going on in multiple places. And so I think it was more beat this child till he never speaks of it again.
Jeez.
And I don't think it was about chastising the sin out of him, but yeah. So but anyhow, that, and then I guess this kind of leads into one of my other sons was molested when he was 5, and by a 13-year-old teenager, and this person had been molested by her father, and that's part of the reason why they were there. I don't hold anything against her. I think it's it's one of those things that continues. It's kind of a chain event. But when I held it accountable, I wanted help for my other son. I wanted him to get, how do you process that when you're 5 years old? How do you cope, and how do you learn right from wrong? And I didn't feel equipped, and I was at the place that was supposed to have the answers. And so I know I wrote it up 2 or 3 times. When are we going to get called in? When are we going to address these things with my son to help him cope with what happened? And because she never confessed, they just worked on trying to getting her to confess, and they never addressed his issues, as far as helping him through that. And then of course it happened to my daughter as well, from a teenage boy, and I don't know, I'm sure he was disciplined, but I don't know anything. There was no, at that point I didn't even ask for help. I figured I was a better wisdom, I had more wisdom by then to help her process it, that I wasn't going to get help from the eldership or the counselors or anything like that.
Did you, so no one of the eldership ended up knowing about your daughter?
Oh yeah, they knew.
Okay.
They
But
knew.
It was just like swept under the rug, like
Well,
everything else.
it just, you hold it accountable to the parent that it happened, and then it's over. That's it. It's up to them to take care of it. And in that instance, it was, leaders in the church, it was their son. So
It just makes me, I'm just trying to process some of this because I didn't know, and
right.
it just makes me so mad and just angry, and I feel so bad for y'all, just just going through all of this. And
Right.
And I think the more stories I've heard, it's just it's kind of been like a cycle. Like it came
Right.
from like the top and just kind of just kept going and just kept going and just kept going, and nobody, and we're all told, don't talk about it. You cannot go to the police and you cannot
Right.
talk about it.
Right. I remember my sister saying, well, shouldn't you go to the police? And I remember telling her no, that that it would be handled, and that I didn't want her to be in trouble. I wanted her to get help, and I wanted my son to get help. And so, I mean, it was something that we didn't ever address. And I don't know, to be honest, I don't know if it came down from the heads. I don't know if fathers were molesting sons, or, if there was molestation from parents to child, or was it students coming through the program. Maybe that's why there was no teen challenges for whole families, because there was wisdom in that, maybe maybe it was from other teenage kids, you know, because everybody came from shaded backgrounds or, you know, troubled marriages or whatever. So I don't know how it entered. All I know was it was rampant among, you know, if it happened to 3 out of 5 of my children, you
Yeah,
know.
I feel like I'm trying to ask this, and a lot of it seems like a lot of this were young kids at some of the time, and I just don't understand how a kid just doesn't know. Not that these were all kids doing this, but maybe they were teenagers. They were kind of between kids and teenagers. But a kid or teen, you don't just know how to do some of this stuff,
Right. Like
you
my
know, so
kids, they were little. I mean, Troy was 6. My other son was 5. My daughter was between 5 and 7. It happened a couple of times. You know, I don't think that, like I say, that's not something that's on their mind. It's something that's perpetrated on them. So.
Yeah, it's really sad. And the more people I have spoken with, I've heard just more stories.
I've got a lot of people running back and forth. Sorry.
And it's all good. Yeah, so what goes, you know, after you're sexually abused and then you're disciplined for being, it's just crazy. It's just so bizarre and crazy. And I totally agree with you that part of the reason probably was to keep mouth shut.
Right. And other instances with one of my sons was if there was trouble among boys and he was involved, whether he was the instigator or whether he was not the instigator, if they disciplined him, then it kind of left all the other boys off the hook. I think that happened with both of our older boys, but I know that at one point he was called in, Brian was called in with one of my sons, and the discipline was similar to what had happened with Troy. And when I talked to him afterwards, he said, "Mom, I didn't do it. I didn't do it." And they just kept spanking him for a confession. And he said, "I finally told him I did it because they were never going to stop." And so it's just horrific, and it's heartbreaking as a parent to know that you allowed those things, that you know, for Brian participated he can't even talk about it without tearing up. He's repeatedly asked our boys forgiveness, and they've forgiven him. They've got good relationships, and their relationships with their dad were restored after we left there.
I mean, that is good.
I mean, we have a whole family, and we are together, and there's not division in our family, and my sons love their father and respect him, and he's a different man. He's not the same man that he was. And you know, he went there for help for anger issues, and they you know, they never said, "Oh, don't discipline in anger." They were like, you know, there was a scripture I wanted to share that they used, and it was Proverbs 20:30. "The blueness of a wound cleanseth away evil, so do stripes the inward parts of the belly." And it just breaks my heart that that they would use that scripture to excuse abuse. And I get, if you get some swats by a rod or by a switch from a tree or whatever, it's going to leave a little mark, but that's different than black and blue from your back to your thighs, you know.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. I mean, they, like I've said before, they just took it to a whole nother level.
yeah.
And I mean, hearing y'all's story, hearing like other people's story of it was going on almost in every household. It was just like a thing, like, oh yeah, their butt is black and blue, their backside is black and blue.
And
Okay, well,
I remember with Troy's, when Troy was black and blue and I was just so horrified. I remember we weren't back together, and I remembered he was getting into the bathtub, and there was a bunch of, he was in the single moms dorm. I think they were watching him for the night. And while I had some tasks that I had to go do in the evening, but so he was getting into the bathtub, and I remember showing, having one of the single moms look, past the curtain and see what was there. I was hoping for a reaction. I was hoping for, some help or guidance or something. I just, because I couldn't even hardly talk to my husband about it because we had a monitor, and she just kind of put a poker face on and walked away. And so it was, I mean, obviously she knew she couldn't say anything about it. I don't blame her, but I'm like, she had to have known that that was wrong. And she just probably had no way of dealing with it, but maybe if I go back, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say there was I guess there was an incident with that between Troy and one of David's sons, and you tried to go and confront what was going on. And do you want to tell that?
So the kids, they all played in the courtyards, the boys, and his son was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years older than Troy. And anyhow, they wrestled and they played, and it was, some of it was unsupervised. But once again, Troy was getting ready for his bath, and all around his nipples were black and blue, both of them, black and blue. Like, and I'm like, well, what happened? He wasn't even going to tell me. And he was like, we were wrestling, and David's son bit him, was biting him for fun. And
how old, I'm sorry, real quick, how old was he and how old was Troy?
Well, Troy was probably 6 or 7. This was all when I was still in the program. So we came when he was 6, and he was maybe 7 by the time we graduated. So 6 or 7. And I know that this young man was at least 3 years older than Troy. So I was livid, and I was a mother in pursuit. And you never got to talk to DK without permission. You never got to, like, he was just untouchable. Like, you'd write things up, and maybe he would address it, and then it would come through somebody else to you. But like, you never could call him on the phone or whatever. But I went over to his house, knocked on the door, and I don't know if he answered it. I think he answered it. And I said, I need to talk to you about what happened. And I told him what happened. And he just mocked me and said that, boys will be boys, and they need to play rough, and that, what am I trying to do? Raise a mama's boy and a sissy? And so, in other words, he wasn't going to address it with his son. I was like being a sissy, or being a overprotective mother, and I was going to create a sissy.
Jeez.
And a mama's boy. So anyhow, I mean, that got shut down abruptly. And then and like, I had only been there a few weeks, and we were from Michigan, so I'll tell you about, I didn't have a lot of summer clothes, and I remember buying shorts 3 pairs of shorts and multiple shirts to match these shorts. And it was a big deal to spend the money and get new clothes. And they weren't short shorts. They weren't tight, but I have long arms, long legs. So a lot of leg shows, and my arms were like, my fingertips were about an inch and a half past the shorts. And anyhow, all of a sudden I got told I couldn't wear those shorts and that they were not appropriate. And I was like, okay. And then they took me to the thrift and I got a khaki pair of shorts that I felt like they were old lady shorts, but I had 1 pair of shorts. They took 3 pair and I got 1 pair. And I had to wear those shorts every day. It was ridiculous. And then it was shortly after that DK's wife was on campus in her little jogging outfit, which was short shorts and tight shorts. And I was like thinking that was just, wrong, that, let's all have the same standards, right? So I wrote it up like an idiot, I don't know, and it ended up in 115.
And these were real quick, you're talking about, you wrote it up and people would get demerits and stuff.
Right. So I mean, if you had an issue with anything, you were to write it up. You weren't able to just go talk to somebody. So anyhow, I wrote it up and questioned why did I have to get rid of, much more conservative shorts while, this is going on. So it was a stupid little thing, but it just taught me, that, do as I say, not as I do. And, what applies to us does not apply to them, and I remember getting demerits, and of course they throw on their scriptures for you to look up, and you have to fill out, what the Lord shows you. And I just remember really searching my heart and going, okay, and letting it go and thinking to myself that, I came here to grow and change. And so if my shorts are not modest, then my shorts are not modest. And, so let's just move forward, So, I mean, it kind of set a precedent though, because I only ended up in 115 for counseling one other time. And it was years later. But I was there with my husband several times, but it just set a precedent that you don't go against the authority there, because it's not going to get anywhere, but you're going to be belittled or whatever. So it set a precedent.
That's how like, I mean, it sounds kind of funny what you're saying, but like, that's kind of how it was. It was like you would get in trouble for stuff like that, but yet it was okay for some of the eldership or the wife or whatever. They, don't come against them. Don't, they can they can do what they want and everything.
Right.
It could be from the littlest things to the biggest things to do with stuff with like drinking and everything.
Right.
Yeah, that's just insane. So did you, we're saying in the program, you did start seeing red flags then?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like there were things that I saw that I didn't agree with. I didn't understand and I didn't agree with, but I felt like there were enough changes in Brian and enough changes in me, and we were learning. I mean, I think that the curriculum was good and we were learning things. And so we were learning, supposedly we had light meetings where we brought, I don't remember the light being an acronym. I remember light being in reference to
so light meetings are living in group harmony through truth. It's LIGHTT.
Okay.
And so you would have these light meetings, whether it was they would bring a few people together and like you would confess your sins one to another, or it was just a
Right.
meeting, like you felt like there was an overall consensus of there are some wrong things happening, and so we all need to confess.
Right. And we would, and there was some healthiness to that, as far as, bringing things out in the open and addressing things and dealing with them. And I mean, if your heart was postured to be humble and to grow and change, then it was good. It was good for you, unless it was ridiculous, and a lot of times, like somebody was describing the outer circle and then the inner circle, and the outer circle being the students in the program, and some of the staff. Some of the staff was amazing. They had good intentions and good hearts and serving the Lord, and so there was good. And so I think that the corruption was farther up, and the farther you went up, the more corrupt things were. And so I just feel like sometimes those meetings didn't involve any of the elders, and they were good, and
well, that's probably true. I know that we would have them a ton when we were traveling on Straightway, which is like the drug prevention team that some of us were a part of. We had them all the time, and I hated it. Looking back, I'm just like, because the stuff, like you would just think, I remember sitting there thinking, what should I confess? I don't know what I've done wrong. Should I just make it up? Half the time I'd be like, guys, man, I've just been struggling with having bad thoughts, like, well, what kind of bad thoughts? What do I don't know.
right.
But I would still feel so guilty, but like, I don't know why. Why do I feel so guilty? It's because it would make you feel so, you need to confess. There's an overall there's an overall perviness because you guys are pervy.
Right. Well, and I think too, like when we went through the program, it seems to me like there were 150 students, so light meetings took up large rooms, and like the day room would be packed with the women. And so it wasn't like you would get, like you'd each have an opportunity to confess. It would be just what was happening, and maybe a handful of people would be addressed, because there was no time, but they would last 2 hours long. It was ridiculous, but dealing with things. And so, I mean, if you didn't have a problem with anybody else, or if nobody had a problem with you, you kind of just slid through those light meetings. And so it was just long and grueling, like the messages. And that's something that, when David got up in church and said, we have an announcement to make, and I know that the elders that were there at that time were like right behind him with the same message, that Assemblies of God and Teen Challenge put David in a box of, a jurisdiction, and there's such a need and such a demand for his message, and for, reaching out to whole families, that he needs to be able to go outside of, a jurisdiction on a map, and so because he's doing such a great thing, that he left with a blessing, with full blessing from Assemblies of God and Teen Challenge. And looking back, I think he probably didn't have a blessing. There was probably some sort of debate, and he left with his ego. And the reason I say that is when we visited Northwest Arkansas, when our son was living up here, we went to an Assembly of God church with him, and then we went out to eat with a bunch of people from that church. And one of the guys that was an elder in that church, he goes, "Oh yeah, I've heard about him." "Oh yeah, I heard about that place." you know, and
Yeah.
Brian and I both looked at each other, and we were like embarrassed that we were from there, you know. So I think that I have a feeling that the story we were given was probably not an accurate story. And after that, the numbers dwindled.
Hmm. Well, apparently, what a couple of people have told me is that right during that time, right before it changed to Family Life Training Center, that people from there tried coming to the center and trying to tell David what was going on, but David wouldn't have it. They tried to like confront him and stuff, but he just
Right.
wouldn't have it. And this is all coming up. I've heard this from a couple of people now, and I just found all this out. I didn't yeah, wasn't aware, but yeah, that's just crazy. I'm like, my God, wow. So there definitely was a lot more to the story than what we knew, or
Right.
what they or you know, or what was all told to us. So
Right. Right.
so you guys get out of the program and everything. You guys decide to stay, and I guess what were some, obviously there was some red flags going through the program, but as you're living there and everything, was there other things you started noticing? And
So I think that, so we had this time, of course, this is a drug and alcohol rehab, and or any life controlling problem, and ours was anger. We didn't drink or smoke before we came, so it wasn't going to be an issue when we left or whatever. But they had this meeting, and they were like, we go to Europe, and you know, Christians in the Christian churches across the world drink wine with their dinner, and they have a glass, you know, they have a glass of wine or a beer, and they don't get drunk because they're filled with the Holy Spirit. And so it's okay. The Bible says don't get drunk with wine. And if you're filled with the Holy Spirit, you won't have a problem. It doesn't matter whether you've been an alcoholic in the past. If you're filled with the Holy Spirit, you'll have self-control. And so they had this big old meeting, and it introduced that you could drink and it was acceptable. And so after that, I would like, we never fit in. I felt like there were a handful of women, your mom, she was so sweet, always good to us, and Virginia and Tony and you know, a handful of women, and just that were good women to be around and friends. But as far as the eldership and as far as the clique or the group, we did not fit in at all. We always felt like we were outsiders and never really fit in. But I would catch wind of people drinking, and like it would sound like it more than just a casual drink, or more, you know, it just sounded like there was, like, people were getting drunk. And so I brought it to my home group leaders' attention, you know, like, I don't understand this. I don't think that this is right. And I'm like, if people were alcoholics in the past, I mean, isn't this a stumbling block? I don't get it. You know, like I was frustrated. And I remember getting, you know, being told that I shouldn't be judging other people, and that double honors due where double, you know, give double honor where double honors due. They just would start throwing out scriptures that, you know, that made me feel like I was out of place, you know, to suggest those things. And so it didn't get anywhere. I remember Troy went to Laterno University, a Christian university, and even that in itself, like, I wanted him to get away because I felt like if I didn't, he would fall into the traps, you know. And actually I went to David's mother. Remember Grandma Krishke? She was sweet. And
She's the sweetest lady, yes.
she was. And I in the end, I cut her hair all the time. And so I felt like we always visited. And in the end, I felt like she was not happy with what her son was doing. And she was like, no, by all means, he needs to go to college, and he needs to go to a Christian college, blah, blah. Of course, we ran out of funds on the first year, but long story short, I remember the praise and worship leader, David's oldest daughter, and the youth pastor at the time, they made money by going into the schools and doing presentations. I don't know what it was about then. It wasn't Straightway, it was something different, but they needed Troy for sound. And so he had come back from school, and he had stayed away from drinking and had been pretty straight. And he turned 21 when they were on a trip, and so they took him to a bar and bought him drinks, and then praised him because he could hold his liquor. And I just felt like that was such a horrible thing for a praise and worship leader and a youth pastor to participate in. You know what I'm saying? To instigate.
Well, the aspect there is, I think to each their own if they're gonna have drinks and everything.
Right.
And I drink, but the thing there was they were going into schools and telling kids, don't do drugs or drink alcohol.
Right. Right. So
and
that's
then,
what,
like,
yeah.
like going to do with that. I'm like, just don't say that then. I don't know.
I know. So, and it wasn't so much, he was 21 and he was going to make that decision anyhow. It doesn't really matter, other than that it just shows their hearts were not in the right place, and they shouldn't have been in leadership or in those positions if that was the lifestyle that they chose. And I think there was more to them traveling together than really, I don't know, could be, but
yeah, definitely have heard some things. Yeah.
Right. So I think one of the other things was, I remember there was a shower for a lady getting married. She had 8 children, and her husband had left, and that could mean 2 different families, but never mind. Anyhow, all I'm saying is that there was a shower, and at the shower, this was the first time that I had really witnessed with my own eyes. Okay, so at the shower, we were at a restaurant in Houston, a long line of table of women, and we were celebrating this gal getting married, and it was a good occasion, and they were all ordering drinks, and several drinks, and then the next thing I knew, David's new wife was, she was getting pretty loud, and behind me there were 2 elders' wives arguing over who was going to be responsible for her. I was responsible for her last time. No, it's your turn to be responsible for her. And neither one of them wanted to take responsibility for her because she was going to get smashed. And so I was like, okay, now it's not just hearsay. I've witnessed it with my own eyes. And so I brought that to my home group leader's attention, and I was like, now maybe they'll listen to me. Oh yeah, they did. That was my other attempt. That was my other visit to room 115. Yes, I got called in.
They pulled you. You weren't even, I guess you weren't even drinking, right? At that,
I think I probably had a drink because yeah, I'm not I will have a drink now and then. I will have a drink. I'm not a drinker. It's just not, I don't judge those who do. I just feel like people don't need to be getting drunk. But anyhow, long story short, that's where I'm at. But I remember getting called in to 115, and I remember David's right-hand man. He preached more messages than David. And I remember him reaming me over the coals. over, you know, the eldership and their wives. They are not drinking too much. They drink in moderation. No one's getting drunk, and you are blowing this out of proportion, and you need to, you know, you need to stop. And it seemed like it went on forever. I don't remember all that was said, other than at the end, he wanted me to clarify twice, like, do you understand that we are not getting drunk and that we are only drinking in moderation? You understand that, right? And like, he made me say it, you know, and I was like, okay, well, I'm saying it to get out of here, but I don't believe it, right? Like my son, right? Here we go, you know. And so the counseling session ended, and then a few months later, it wasn't long after that, this particular elder was in a horrific car accident. And once again, from the pulpit, it was announced that he was in this accident, bless his heart, and that it was fog, there was fog, and he couldn't see and crossed the line, and it was a horrible accident. He messed up his ankle. But in the other car, I guess a pregnant woman died, and I understood it. I think it was like a Marine or somebody was home on visit and ended up losing his legs, or one of them, or something. It was horrific. Long story short, we all, you know, he's recovering and this is hard. He can't go to work. And, you know, yes, we need to take care of his family, but boy, we were taking over food to his family. And, you know, half the time I didn't see his family, but he was there because he couldn't get around. And you know, he was on crutches, and we were like poor. I thought, you know, here's your food, and I hope you get better soon, and I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah. You know, and yes, the family needed caring for. But anyhow, it seemed like it took a year or two after that. All of a sudden there was a meeting. We got called into the meeting, and he's completely recovered now. And he stands before all of us and says, he tells what happened, that he was drunk and that he had this car accident, and that he's going to prison the next day. And so they waited until, like, they were hoping and trying to prevent any of us from knowing what really happened, and preventing him from going to prison. But when it came down to it, he was going to prison for drunk driving and killing a person and maiming another. But then his story, it wasn't, oh, if you're filled with the Spirit, you'll only drink in moderation because you have self-control. Then his story was, you know, from the time I was a teenager, the first time I drank until I passed out. And he's like, some people, it's just chemically wired in them to drink that way, and they just drink until they pass out. And like, he excused it all away, that he was, you know, his chemistry was such that he was bound to drink until he passed out. And he said it in such a way that even at that meeting, I was convinced that it was okay. And until after I reflected on it, like, I hate that his family went through what his family went through because of that. I mean, that breaks my heart. And but for him to sit there in counseling and just ream me over the coals, and, you know, make me confess that no one has a problem in the eldership with drinking, you know.
That's what oh my God. I'm like, cannot believe they pulled you into counseling. Did anybody else of the people that were actually drinking like that, to that extent, did they get anything about them? I'm assuming not.
Nothing. I don't think so, because they were all a part of it. I mean, they were all a part of that. And so, and then I remember that one time Brian and I went to Chili's. We're back at Chili's again. We went to Chili's, and there was DK and his wife. And they're like, come over here, come over here. You know, like he was just loud. And my son had already told me that he went there with his friends. One of my sons did. And he's like, David was drunk. David was drunk. And I was like, no, honey, he wasn't drunk. You know, and I was like trying to convince my 16-year-old son that he was not drunk, you know, that it's just, you know, he was just having a good time. I'm sure he'd had one drink. No, mom, he was drunk. And so anyhow, we were there and saw firsthand they were having dinner there too. And they said, come over, join us. So we sat with them. That's the first time I think we'd ever sat with them for anything ever. And so they were both drinking and they were arguing when they were ordering, he wanted to order a drink and she wanted to order a drink, and they were arguing amongst themselves who gets to drink because one of them has to drive. And they ended up both drinking, but then what surprised me was even though he was getting alcoholic drinks one after the other, he was taking a flask out of his pocket and dumping more in. I'm like, okay. So anyhow, those were all the big red flags that I can think of for now.
Yeah, the whole pulling you into counseling, I'm like, well, what the actual F? That's just crazy when they were the ones really drinking to that extent. And then the whole thing that happened with the elder that got in the car accident, I mean, they remember, like I remember a meeting that happened before the main thing that you're talking about, where they pulled everyone in the Blue Chapel, and he was still in a wheelchair at the time. I don't know if you guys were there for this. He was still in a wheelchair at the time. I feel like they may have told us what really happened then, because they were telling it was one of the times I think that they locked us in the Blue Chapel. Like they were telling us some other stuff. It wasn't just his thing. There was some other stuff going on, and like kind of like,
yeah, I think I remember there being some sort of a meeting about, but I don't think that it was really, I think if you knew what was going on, then you understood what they were saying. But like, I didn't know that he was drinking when that accident happened. And so I do recall them having a meeting saying, hey, we need to reel it in. Some people are drinking too much. We need to not be that way.
So I think it was in this same one, it might have been in this same one, DK started saying, but like they would kind of vaguely say some stuff. They wouldn't fully say what was going on. So he's explaining like that I think he might have had told us that he got his DUI or whatever. But he's explaining like, I got pulled over. I had only had one beer, and but I had pills. I think he has like pills. At the time, I think he said he took them for back issues or something to the extent. I don't fully remember. But his excuse was he said, I had one beer and I had taken like one pill and I got pulled over. And then, so he's explaining.
And like, I remember that. And it was like, I didn't realize they were going to interact with each other. Like it was going to be a problem. You know, he didn't.
That's what yeah. So he's explaining all this to us, like, you know, kind of in his defense or whatever.
Right.
But now I'm looking back and I'm like, pretty sure you were probably flasking it up and having a few more beers.
Right.
Like,
yeah, I think so. So I remember, do you want to know about when we decided to leave and how we decided?
Yeah. So okay, so you're going, obviously seeing all these things. And so it gets for anyone that's trying to leave, it's usually like, for me, it took a couple of years. You're in this process of thinking or whatnot. So was there a final red flag, or was it just kind of over time, you just got sick of everything?
I think that probably for 3 to 5 years before we left, we wanted to leave. I think that when we came to Northwest Arkansas to visit our son and went to another church, like we just realized that we realized that we were, at that point, we realized we were ashamed of the church that we went to. I remember the bus, there was issues on the bus with DK's kids, and he wanted to get those bus drivers fired no matter what. Like, instead of dealing with his children that were misbehaving on the bus, he would rather get the bus drivers fired. And so one day he just shows up at my house, and I'm having a meeting at your house. He brings in all these kids, and he's like spoon feeding them negative things to say about the bus driver.
I remember that.
Right.
I remember that.
So it was horrible. And anyhow, and we all knew that this particular child of his was out of line, you know. And anyhow, but I remember that my son was friends with the, I don't know what he would be called, but he was over the bus district, the district superintendent. I don't know what he was, but he was over the buses. And he liked me and liked my husband, and he thought, well, let me just talk to her. So he called me into the school office and wanted to know my take on David. And I'm like,
well, where do I begin?
Yeah, I know. And even to that point, I defended David. I'm like, he's a man in charge, and he's so used to being in charge that, you know, that, and he has to be to run such a big, you know, ship that, you know, sometimes he comes across brash, or, you know, I made up excuses for him. And I was like, but in time, I realized, you know, I didn't believe what I was saying, you know. I think it was a progression for us. And when it came down to leaving, I think Troy had already gone to the Navy. He had come back. Our younger three were like probably 6, 8, and 10, you know. And in my heart, this was the change. This was the point of change. Was there was so much going on. There was drinking, there was people being molested, there was even talk of pot and whatever. And at that, you know, at that point it was so taboo. Anyhow, but all I knew was that there was a lot going on, and it certainly didn't seem like a spiritual environment to raise my children in. And I felt like both of my older boys were suffering from abuse and rejection and inappropriate correction, you know, and that we were working with them to overcome things that happened to them there. And so, and I was looking at my younger three going, I don't want this for them. I want them to know how good God is, and that there are healthy, wholesome churches, and that there's, you know, that God is good. And so I wanted more of the Lord, and I wanted more of the Lord for my kids. And I remember Troy coming home from the Navy, and he met up with somebody who had recently left, your sister, in fact, and her first husband. And I trusted both of them. And anyhow, they let Troy know everything that had gone on in Europe, that, you know, and things that I had no idea about. And so like they just, and so then Troy told me, and I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure that this is not an exaggeration? Are you sure that this is not, you know, just being disgruntled? Because if anybody left and they said something negative about the center, they were lying. You know, this is, we've been there 17 years. So like, we knew that if you leave, you're out of God's will. And if you leave and you say something horrible, then it's a lie, right? And so anyhow, that was the little push over the edge I had already been, and then I felt like the Lord revealed to me, look, if you're seeking me and you want more for your kids than what's being offered there, why would I curse you? You're seeking after me and you want more of me. Why would I curse you? And I was like, oh yeah. So why would he curse me if I really want more of him? Why would he curse me if I want better for my children? He's not going to curse me. He's a loving God, you know? And so it was a realization of that. And then Troy just solidifying the deceptions and the, you know, the hypocrisy that we were able to say, okay, now let's do this peaceably, because everybody else who leaves, it's all, you know, oh, they left in a bad way, right? So we wrote it up that Cody was attending church in town. We didn't tell him which church because it was a church that they wouldn't want us to go to. But anyhow, that Cody was going to church in town, and that if Cody was being ministered to and growing, we wanted to be a part of that, and we wanted to do this as a family. And so then they call us in for counseling, and what it was just horrible, but they wanted to take 3 months so that they could see if we were up to date on all our tithes and offerings and first fruits, and so we were willing to go through their 3-month exit process. And then we went twice to church after that, and it was just like we just didn't want to be there at all. Like we had had a taste of where we wanted to be and the last place we wanted to be, and we're like, we're just doing this for them, and we know that it's okay, and God's called us there. So we just called them up and said, we're not going to do the 3 month. And they said, okay, fine then. And that was the end of it. And so we started attending a church, and I mean, I feel like the first 6 months we couldn't get through a praise and worship service without just tears and tears and tears. And I think God was just cleansing us of all the things that had happened. And then we started rebuilding, and we've been rebuilding ever since.
Yeah. So did but when you guys actually did leave, were they like, oh, they left in a bad way, or just kind of like shrugged it off? Like, because
I think for the most part they didn't say anything, because a year or so later, I think Tony left with her family, and we were talking, and she said, you know, I don't think they ever said anything about you guys when you left. And I don't know. I mean, if you recall, I don't know. But I don't think they discussed it with us. And then it was shortly afterwards, maybe 6 months or a year afterwards, that Troy and I were talking, and I was like, we never did fit in. We just never felt like we fit in. And I said, for once, I feel like I'm actually a part of something, you know, a part of a church and a part of the people. And Troy said, well, the reason you didn't fit in was because if they hung out with you, then you had standards that they did not have. And it, you know, you made them uncomfortable. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe, I don't know. But anyhow, yeah, that was kind of, but we, like I say, we broke free 17 years. And we went through the same thing of anytime anything went wrong, the last thing I wanted was anybody from the center to find out, because if they found out, they would say, it's because God's cursing them because they're not under the covering, you know, or, you know, and we're human, you know, we're human. Things go wrong, things happen. And, you know, and I would question myself, is this because we left? Am I under a curse? No, I'm not under a curse. God is not cursing me. You know, this is, this is the sum of choices that we've all made, you know? And so anyhow, I just had to work through all of that. And then, I think the latest discovery for me has been, I've been a nurse for 15 years, and the latest discovery for me was I cannot, it just bothers me to no end when there's corruption in authority and at work. I mean, I see it, you know, and I've quit jobs because I was just so sickened and turned off by managers or, you know, people in authority that were corrupt or were two-faced or were, you know, just not truthful. And I just couldn't be under it, you know? And so, you know, it's a lesson that I've had to learn. And I'm like, you know, that's, you know, the Lord's teaching me that you're gonna work under people like that. You just don't have to subject yourself to all of their beliefs, you know. And you know, but the Lord's had to heal me even recently over that kind of issues, because I couldn't cope with it. It's like a trigger, or, you know, I think we all have triggers and panic buttons, you know, from being there.
I mean, for sure. I mean, there's definitely, you know, there's things that I don't notice at times that all of a sudden something will happen. And I'm like, it just set me off. Not set me off, whether it's like a panic attack or an anxiety or you know, something that is just, But yeah, thank you so much for sharing and everything. I really appreciate you coming on. I know like it's not easy for everyone to tell their story, and so when someone comes on, I'm just so grateful, because it is, I mean, some of these things are really hard to talk about, and some of it is embarrassing, some of it is just like, why did I, or there's a ton of guilt and shame. And at least, you know, and I know you guys have dealt with that, and at least you guys saw, you know, you saw what was wrong, and you moved and you tried to change, and that's good. I mean, that's awesome.
But it took us 17 years because we were so manipulated, and remember what David used to say, like, oh, somebody says you're just being brainwashed, and he's like, but you guys were so messed up, you needed your brains washed. You know, remember he used to say that all the time. Like, you know, like, you guys were all so messed up, you needed your brains washed. And so like that was his excuse for brainwashing us. And but I'm like, 17 years of our lives, we have memories of our children in our home and special vacations and things like that, but like we do not visit memories there. Maybe a handful of memories with some good people that you know we were with, but the whole idea of the thing, we just don't visit it. And that's sad. 17 years of your life, and my heart goes out for, I was thinking about people that are still there, and some of them it's probably been 35 years for them. And I'm like, they absolutely, like, at least, you know, my parents raised me in a church, and I knew that God loved, I mean, I knew that God loved me, and I knew that he had good plans for me. And so I had something to compare it with, you know what I'm saying? And something to say, well, this isn't right, you know, because this is better over here. You know, I had, some people never had that before they came in. So the only good things they learned was that first year and a half, you know, where they were learning that curriculum, and it changed their lives. And so now they're forever indebted to this, you know, come hell or high water, they're going to stay with it because that's what got them off of drugs or whatever. You know, and it's just, it's heartbreaking when I think about the children. I just want the children to be safe, and I don't want the children to suffer that kind of rejection and abuse.
Mhm. Yeah, well, hopefully, I know that this is, I mean, just doing more stuff like this will continue to help. And like I said, thank you so much. And
You're welcome.
yes, just want to say, anyone out there listening, thank you so much for listening in. And I hope this can help people that are outside our cult, with everything to do with us as well.
Mhm.
And just helping more people and everything. And thank you so much. And yeah, we're gonna go ahead and end here. I feel like
Thank you, Syria. Thank you for
fun.
everything.
Yes. But yes, thank you everyone, and have a good evening.
Bye-bye.